Pro Army Revenge, PAR, is PAR for the course, by user Sloppy Ice Cream. Edit, dear reader, I spent the majority of my career in Special Operations Forces, SOF. I carried a gun, not a pen. I am not a writer, nor an editor. I am not forcing anyone to read this saga. I understand it is long, but a TLDR will detract from the story. I was told to post here because it is doing well at r/petty revenge, r/malicious compliance, and r/military stories. Dear reader, I had an illustrious 21-year career in the United States Army, USA, which miraculously concluded with an honorable discharge. 21 years and 14 combat deployments produce a lifetime of stories. The overwhelming majority of memories are comical, and worth remembering. Like the time I borrowed another human's truck, or the time I relocated an artillery display in my barracks room. However, some memories are extra ammunition after a live fire exercise, LFX, worth donating to Chuck and Barry. Memories suppressed so well they never happened. However, these memories can be unintentionally triggered. I worked at the bad place before attending assessment and selection. Working there was the sole reason for attending selection. The bad place, TBP, was a 3-star command, and nursing home for dying careers. TBP was a mixture of National Guard, Army Reserve, active duty, and Department of the Army civilians. It was essential a foreign planet for a soldier who had grown up in regiment and the 82nd Airborne Division. Overnight, I had transitioned from airborne infantry to the equipment tracking officer. It was my sole purpose in life to source pre-deployment training equipment, PDTE, for deploying National Guard and Army Reserve units. These units would request specific types of equipment, and it was my responsibility to source at least 2/3 of the requested equipment. I should mention, my boss at TBP was Department of the Army Civilian, DAC. I had 10 years of service under my belt, and it was the first time my direct supervisor was a civilian. Now, I have no issues with civilians, but I do have issues with horrible leadership. Mike was horrible. Mike was a dirty diaper, full of shit and always on my ass. Side note. Sloppy, I feel the need to mention TBP recently moved. Reader, moved? Sloppy, yes. Deep South one day, and the Midwest the next. Reader, aliens? Sloppy, nope. Base realignment and closure, BRAC. Reader, what? Sloppy, the Army decided to close some bases and expand others. Reader, puzzled. Oh. So, what's this have to do with the story? Sloppy, there was 2 active duty soldiers and 2 Department of the Army civilians performing the duties of equipment tracking officers in the Deep South. None of them moved, and all continuity was lost. Reader, okay. There had to be some kind of transition though. Right? Sloppy, yes. All 4 of them spent countless hours informing me how terrible of a human Mike was via email. Reader, oh. Story time again. Dear reader, I had no earthly idea what my job was, or how I was to perform it initially. Making matters worse, I would quickly learn Mike had no earthly idea either. Mike only knew what Z, final product, looked like and was mentally unaware of the other 26 letters in the alphabet. Mike was less useful than blinker fluid and football bats. Fear not, dear reader, it only took 3 months of working from 0500 to 2300 to garner a nascent understanding of my roles and responsibilities. Thankfully, I had wonderful counterparts at sister organizations. Furthermore, they were all equally aware of how useful Mike was. Fast forward 4 months. The section was still composed of exactly 1 sloppy. I was 25% of the total allotted manpower performing 100% of the duties. If you wait until the last minute, it only takes a minute, was my battle cry. Life was grand. I had developed standard operating procedures, SOPs, and automated matrices to assist me. I was even starting to catch errors from the department that validates equipment requests. Note, remember, it was my duty to source 2/3 of the equipment request. I had a very unpleasant one-way conversation in August of 2011. Captain, CPT, Richard Cranium was requesting I provide 3 Rhino buses for training. Dear reader, I kindly explained why fulfilling this request was unfeasible. Problem solved, right? Nope. I then received a call from Lieutenant Colonel, LTC, Richard Cranium. I then received a call from Colonel, COL, Richard Cranium. The issue quickly became a self-licking ice cream cone of chaos. Ring. 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 Sloppy, the bad place, G4 Equipment Tracking Officer, this is Rank Sloppy speaking. How may I help you, sir or ma'am? Caller, this is Major General, MG, Richard Cranium from the California National Guard. Side note, civilian readers, the Major General is the boss dickhead for all National Guard soldiers in the state of California. Sloppy does not get calls from general officers, goes. Ever. Sloppy, how can I help you, sir? MG Richard Cranium, angry. I am calling to inquire as to why you will not fulfill our equipment request. Is it not your policy to provide 2/3? Dear reader, I was now a bit agitated. I had clearly explained the issue to the company commander, battalion commander, and brigade commander. I now have an irate god-level commander on the phone, and 2 courses of action, COAs, are cycling through my mind. I could kindly explain why this request was absurd, or I could go full regiment sloppy. Slot machine sloppy. Pulls lever. Wheels spinning. Still spinning. Regiment sloppy. Sloppy, sir, I clearly explained to the previous commanders why I cannot fulfill their request, and provided other options. MG Richard Cranium, I don't want options. Rank sloppy. I want my 3 Rhino buses. Sloppy, time to get fired attitude, Roger sir. Well, as I told the previous commanders, there are only 5 Rhino buses that exist on Earth. 3 of them are deployed to Iraq, and the other 2 are in Afghanistan. Do you wish for me to forward this equipment request to Forces Command, Forcecom/4-star General? MG Richard Cranium, oh. That won't be necessary. Rank sloppy. Sloppy, are you sure, sir? I mean, I can. MG Richard Cranium, no, did you explain this to? Sloppy, every single one of them, sir. MG Richard Cranium, disregard. I have some phone calls to make. Dear reader, the world was right again. At least I thought it was. It appears the Major General was slow to contact his subordinate leadership. The Colonel had contacted Mike demanding I supply his unit with Rhino buses. One would think a simple explanation would suffice for Mike, but one would be wrong. Common sense is an elusive, fickle creature for Mike. It was like trying to explain what number the letter purple tastes like. Mike, did you tell a unit they can't have a piece of equipment? Sloppy, yes sir. Mike, why? Sloppy, because there are only 5 of them, and they are all deployed to combat zones. Mike, well, you need to figure out how to get them. Sloppy brain, ah? Is this man fucking serious? Sloppy brain, laughing. I think he is. Sloppy, like call the Pentagon and ask them to redeploy them from combat because some unit needs to train with them? Mike, it's not your job to validate equipment. It's your job to source it. Do you understand? Sloppy, lip service. Roger that, sir. Dear reader, when one door closes, check for an open window. I had over 90 units on my desk, and 30,000 pieces of equipment to source for the month of August. It didn't take long to find a window to crawl out. I found a unique request from an infantry unit. They requested a plethora of equipment and it all made sense, minus 4 pieces of equipment. Sloppy brain, pretty sure those 4 pieces of equipment need to be on a different type of request. Right? Sloppy brain, yeah, but it's not your job to validate it. Sloppy brain, oh. Right. Dear reader, I sourced it. All 4 of them. It was not an easy task either. I literally had to scour the entire country for available inventory. I made phone call after phone call to make this request happen. None of the items were collocated. They would need to be transported from the far stretches of the continental United States, and failure was not an option. I had fulfilled my responsibilities. I source the equipment and turn it over to Mike for signature. Mike's signature magically allocates funding and authorizes the transportation of said equipment. Dear reader, shit typically rolls downhill. However, this specific request defied the laws of gravity. Shit was going to roll uphill. I crawled back through the window and waited a month for the fallout to ensue. Truth be told, due to my heavy workload, I had forgotten about my magnificent accomplishment. It was another horrible day at work, until I received a magical phone call. Ring. 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 Sloppy, the bad place, G4 Equipment Tracking Officer, this is Rank Sloppy speaking. How may I help you, sir or ma'am? Caller, hello. I am Sergeant First Class, SFC, Ricky Bobby. I am the Long Range Surveillance, LRS, Platoon Sergeant for Unit Name. Sloppy, hey Ricky. How can I help you? SFC Ricky Bobby, well I am looking at 4 helicopters, and I am told I need to sign for them. Sloppy, yes mode let me look at your request. Shuffling noises. Sloppy, yes. You requested 2 A-60L Blackhawk helicopters and 2 A-47 Chinook helicopters correct? SFC Ricky Bobby, yes, but I requested them for SPIES, Special Purpose Insertion Extraction System, and FRIES, Fast Rope Insertion Extraction System, training. Laughing, I am not a pilot. What the hell am I supposed to do with 4 helicopters? Sloppy, laughing I mean, once you sign for them, they're yours. I suppose you could try to fly them? SFC Ricky Bobby, laughing fucking army. Suppose I could. Sloppy, laughing don't worry man. I've got your back. I have already coordinated with our aviation validators to support your request. I will give you their number. SFC Ricky Bobby, I'm ready to copy. Sloppy, 867-5309. SFC Ricky Bobby, thanks man. Sloppy, call me back if you have any issues brother. I will walk upstairs, G3/operations, and get this sorted so you boys can do SPIES and FRIES. SFC Ricky Bobby, Wilco, will comply, man. Dear reader, not only does shit roll uphill, but shit rolls uphill faster than I expected. I had just hung up the phone and was departing for lunch. I didn't make it 5 feet before I was beckoned to Mike's office. There are 4 chairs in Mike's office. One with a load-bearing capacity of at least 400 pounds, and 4 normal people chairs. I was awkwardly surprised to find it was already standing room only. The G4 Colonel, Deputy G4, Civilian/DAC, and G3, Operations, Colonel were already in Mike's office. Mike, it seems we have an issue rank Sloppy. Sloppy brain, we. Sloppy, really? I am not aware of any issues sir. Mike, well unit name is at Fort Hood, and the battalion commander is wondering why one of his platoon sergeants signed for 4 helicopters. Sloppy, shocked did they request 4 helicopters? I can go get the equipment request. Mike, I have it. Right here. In my hands. Sloppy, puzzled okay. Did they request? Mike, yes. They did. Sloppy, I don't understand they. G4 Colonel, the issue is, we needlessly shipped 4 helicopters across the United States. G3 Colonel, there are already helicopters at Fort Hood. Helicopters, and pilots, there to support SPIES and FRIES training. They are there specifically for this type of request. G4 Colonel, rank Sloppy. Did this request not look odd to you? Sloppy brain, hysterical laughter. Sloppy, absolutely sir. Entire room, shocked faces. Just baffled as fuck. G4 Colonel, then why did you source it? Sloppy retells entire Rhino bus saga. Sloppy, sir, as I understand it, it's not my job to validate. It's my job to source it. Mike made it very clear on multiple occasions. Mike, angry rank Sloppy, do you realize you just cost the army over $100,000 to ship equipment we didn't need to ship? Sloppy, sir. G3 Colonel, pissed off no Mike. You just cost the army over $100,000. Mike, sir. G4 Colonel, Mike. It is your signature that authorizes allocation of money and shipping. Did you tell rank Sloppy it's his job to source? To not validate anything, and only source? Mike, sir, I did, but... G4 Colonel starts walking out. G4 Colonel, Mike. Let's have a meeting. In my office. Sloppy brain, oh. That sounds bad. Sloppy brain, yeah, but Mike. Not us. Sloppy, right. Sloppy retreats to desk. Side note, I know the G3 Colonel. We had worked in the same unit when he was a major. G3 Colonel follows Sloppy. Sits on Sloppy's desk. G3 Colonel, laughing hysterically, how in the fuck did you do it? Sloppy, do what? G3 Colonel, find 4 helicopters. Sloppy, I called everyone. I leveraged my network of contacts, and made it my mission. G3 Colonel, what did your counterparts say about the request? Sloppy, they have the same sentiments towards Mike. G3 Colonel, shaking his head honestly. That's impressive. Sloppy, sir, I was going to get shit on either way. So I decided, fuck Mike. G3 Colon, yup. Fuck Mike I guess. Dear reader, thank you for reading my Petty Army Revenge, PAR. I have good news. I no longer worked for Mike after that interaction. Other misdeeds, stories, came to light after that encounter. I had a long desk-side meeting with the G4 Colonel and fully detailed my relationship with Mike. It's nearly impossible to fire Department of the Army civilians, but it was easy to move me. The G3 Colonel found a more suitable position for an infantryman. It also sucked, but he gave me ample time to prepare for assessment and selection. I was at TBP for 18 horrible months before I found greener pastures. I could lament on all the horrible things, but it's not worth it. Why? At least I know where to go if I ever need 4 fucking helicopters. Cheers. Sloppy. But I didn't retire, by user technogrind. My friend, I'll call her Sandy, worked at a travel agency in British Columbia, Canada. It was a small, owner-operated business with the owner and 3 employees including my friend. Everyone worked Monday to Friday from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. One of my friend's co-workers, I'll call her Jane, an older woman in her early to mid-60s, was a long-time nuisance employee. Among other sketchy behavior, Jane was always scamming ways to take time off over and above her official paid vacation time. In order to make up for the lost hours, she would claim overtime hours/pay by supposedly going into the office in her off hours to finish up work without being requested by the owner to do so. Despite being caught in her own lies on a number of occasions and being warned about trying to claim for unsanctioned overtime, the owner of the travel agency was reluctant to officially reprimand Jane or get rid of her. The reason being is the owner discovered after she had hired Jane that Jane had actually been fired from her previous job at another local travel agency for pulling the same stunts. However, Jane had sued her former employer for unfair dismissal and had won a settlement. After a few years of my friend Sandy working at the travel agency, the owner was ready to retire and offered to sell the business to my friend. Sandy took her up on the deal and took over the business while keeping on Jane and the other employee. Once again, just as the previous owner was afraid to get rid of Jane, so was Sandy for fear of being sued. When Sandy took over the business, she instituted guidelines regarding taking time off and she established an official no overtime policy. Jane would still try with her shenanigans but was far less successful in getting what she wanted with my friend in charge. However, Jane still had one trick up her sleeve when she wanted to take time off on a whim. Sandy was a divorced single mom of 2 boys who were heavily involved in youth hockey. She would sometimes leave the office an hour or 2 before closing to get her boys to hockey practice or a game. In order to avoid requesting in person and potentially being denied, Jane would wait for Sandy to be out of the office to book a day off if she didn't feel like coming into work or had made plans. Sandy would then arrive at work the next morning only to discover that Jane wasn't coming in. Despite this happening a number of times, Sandy would usually let it slide since there was now a definite no overtime policy. Therefore, Jane could no longer claim to come into work on the weekend or after hours in order to try and make up for the day off. She would either miss out on a day's pay, in turn saving Sandy money as the owner, or it would come out of her remaining paid vacation days. Moreover, 2 people in the office at one time could usually handle everything. Jane not coming in was really a no-loss situation for Sandy. There was one time, however, when Sandy was going to be away for 1 or 2 work days just before the weekend to take her boys to a hockey tournament. She told both Jane and the other employee both verbally and in writing that they could not book time off for the dates in question since she would be away and needed both of them in the office. Within a few days of giving this notice, Sandy went into the office on a Saturday to do some paperwork and go through the sales for the week. This is when she discovered that, only the day before, Jane had booked a trip for her daughter and son-in-law to Las Vegas as well as a plane ticket in her name to Calgary where her daughter lived. Both the trip to Vegas and the ticket to Calgary coincided with the dates Sandy would be out of the office. Sandy then checked the vacation booking schedule to further discover that Jane had indeed booked the days off that she had expressly been told she couldn't have. Not mentioning she had discovered the travel Jane had booked for herself and her daughter, Sandy emailed Jane telling her she would have to deny her the days off since she had already been told they were unavailable because she, Sandy, would be away and needed Jane in the office. Through a continued series of email exchanges, Jane replied and outright lied to Sandy with some excuse about her daughter getting some long-awaited medical treatment or surgery, and she needed to go to Calgary to help out for a few days and look after her granddaughter. Sandy replied to this lie by telling Jane she knew about the trip she had booked to Vegas for her daughter and son-in-law, that Jane's trip to Calgary was most likely to babysit her granddaughter while her daughter was in Vegas, and that she would still have to deny Jane the days off, especially since she booked them after being told they were unavailable. Jane countered in her subsequent reply, without even addressing the fact that she had been caught in a lie, that she had been a dedicated employee of the travel agency for several years and couldn't understand why she was being treated so unfairly after all she had done for the business. She then wrote that since she wasn't being treated as a valued employee, she had no choice but to retire and was giving her 2 weeks' notice. Despite Jane's threat, Sandy replied that she would still be unable to grant her the days off and left it at that without making any mention of Jane's threat to quit/retire. Sandy then contacted her accountant, who also acted as her de facto business advisor, and explained what had happened with Jane. Also aware of Jane's previous shenanigans, Sandy's accountant told her that this was the out she had been looking for with Jane, and she had it all in writing. He told her that Jane had essentially resigned/retired and all Sandy needed to do was honor Jane's desire to do so, let her finish out her 2 weeks, or pay her 2 weeks' wages in lieu with no further severance pay legally required since she hadn't been fired. The following Monday, Sandy went into the office early accompanied by her long-term boyfriend to act as a witness. She put Jane's belongings from her desk into a box and took the things that were property of the business. Since Jane was old school and had resisted inputting client information in the computer database, this also included a small box filled with index cards which had client phone numbers, addresses, credit card information, and other personal information noted on them. In the meantime, the other employee had arrived for work, and they all waited for Jane to show up. Jane arrived just before 9 o'clock acting as though nothing had happened and greeted everyone with a good morning as she walked through the door. However, she was apparently taken slightly aback when she noticed Sandy's boyfriend seated in the far corner of the office. At this point, Jane was midway to her desk when Sandy informed her that there was no need to go any further and that she had accepted Jane's notification of retirement. She then handed Jane a check compensating her for the hours she had worked in the current pay period as well as 2 weeks' wages in lieu of Jane finishing out her final 2 weeks before her retirement. Jane was dumbfounded and went into panic mode, "But I didn't retire. I'm not ready to retire." Sandy responded that indeed she had retired, given her notice and had proof of it in writing. All Jane could do was continue repeating, "But I didn't retire. I'm not ready to retire," while unsuccessfully attempting to get the support of the other employee who refused to come to her defense. Sandy then pointed to the box containing Jane's belongings, wished her a happy retirement, and told her to leave the office. Jane quickly rifled through the box and noticed that the small box containing the index cards with client information was not there. She insisted that Sandy return it to her, which Sandy refused to do, explaining that it was property of the business, contained personal client information, and that she would be in violation of Canadian privacy laws if she were to let Jane take it. Jane's shock had now turned to obstinance and she refused to leave without the box. Both the other employee and Sandy's boyfriend had started to get involved, repeatedly telling Jane to just leave. Sandy then informed Jane that if she didn't leave, they would have to call the RCMP, Canadian Police, at which point, Sandy's boyfriend dialed 911 to inform the dispatcher of a disgruntled former employee at XYZ travel agency who was refusing to leave the premises. Within a few minutes, 2 police officers arrived, and Jane immediately ran to the door ranting about being fired and about the missing box of client info. In order to de-escalate the situation, one police officer told Jane to come outside and explain to him her side of the story. The other officer remained in the office to hear Sandy's side of the story, agreeing that Jane was not legally entitled to the box of client info. The other officer then re-entered the business and told Jane to wait outside. He said that Jane was insisting that Sandy was holding onto her personal belongings, namely a box of important information. Both Sandy and the officer who had spoken to her explained the contents of the box to the other officer, who in turn agreed it was not Jane's property. The police officers then picked up the larger box of Jane's personal belongings, took it outside to Jane, and told her she needed to go home. To rub salt in Jane's wounds, the next day, Sandy put up a large sign in the window of the business congratulating Jane on her retirement and even put a small announcement in the local newspaper doing the same thing. The icing on the piece of revenge cake was Sandy, when filling out the necessary government forms for when an employee quits/gets fired/retires, made sure to check the box labeled retired for the reason for Jane no longer being employed. By doing so, Jane was ineligible to collect unemployment insurance benefits.